Good morning. Welcome, everyone. It's 10 a.m. We're going to go ahead and get started with today's technical assistance chat. This is the last chat in our Tier 2 coaching series that we've had on the topic of all things Tier 2. Today, we're going to be talking about team support for monitoring progress and fidelity to evaluate response to Tier 2. Our session is going to be led by our knowledgeable Jason Lobley here from Florida PBIS, who's going to guide us through the intricacies of using progress and fidelity data for Tier 2 decision making. So I'm going to go ahead and turn over today's presentation to Jason to get us started.
Right. Good morning, everybody. I'm Jason Lobley, and I'll be leading the chat. So thanks for joining us this morning. Thanks to Nicole for being our technology guru and keeping this meeting running smoothly. Brooke's here to help us. Brooke Curtis is here to help us with our chat and additional technical assistance around Tier 2. She's our systems guru. And we got Jonathan Blair and Sherry here as well. So thanks for joining us, and thank you guys for joining us as well. As Nicole mentioned, we're going to wrap up our Tier 2 coaching series today. This is our fourth chat of four. And the topic today is Tier 2 team support for monitoring progress and fidelity to evaluate response to Tier 2. So that's a lot there, but we're going to go ahead and unpack that today. So the objectives we're going to focus on today are on how teams can support the evaluation process for their Tier 2 interventions. So, as we're implementing, we want to make sure that our interventions are working and our systems are all in place too. So we're going to explore our progress monitoring tools to support Tier 2 intervention systems. We'll also explore fidelity and monitoring progress, progress monitoring tools to support Tier 2. And we'll also look at how teams can use decision rules to evaluate the effectiveness of Tier 2 interventions and as well as their systems. Okay, so over the last several months in our chat series, we've discussed how teams can get started setting up their systems to support students with Tier 2 behavioral needs. In order to provide an effective Tier 2 system, teams must establish the systemic infrastructure to support their students. Just by having some interventions to work on at a school, it's a good start, but having a comprehensive system to support that Tier 2 intervention or that package of Tier 2 interventions, it's going to enable the school team to maximize the impact of their work and support for their students to enable that they're working more efficiently. So firstly, teams must be able to use multiple sources of data to be able to provide the screening system for who may need additional support. So you've got to kind of work on identifying who's going to need that support. This may be through like teacher nomination or even self-nomination. They're going to be reviewing discipline data like their referrals and their out-of-school suspensions. They may look at other team screening tools, attendance data, or some other means that would be relevant to the school setting they're in. So it's important not only to look at the students with the externalizing needs. Those are the ones that kind of jump out at us quickly. But let's not forget about the students who may have some internalizing needs as well. And those are the ones that kind of maybe more quiet, more, they may kind of slip through the cracks a little bit. So, looking at a system to make sure that those students aren't being missed in our screening process. So once the Tier 2 team is able to identify students who need more intensive supports, it's critical to ensure that that they're provided with an intervention that's likely to meet their needs. So we need to group them and match them to the correct intervention. It can be done by having an array of interventions that might match the function and teach a particular skill that these students may be missing or not engaging in as frequently as we'd like them to. And one other thing to note too is these interventions should be readily available for students so we can quickly get them plugged into the supports that they need. So after the students, the kind of the final step and where we'll focus today is, so after your team has initiated that intervention, it's important to ensure that the student's getting the best outcome possible. And this should be done through progress and fidelity monitoring. This will allow teams to use their data to monitor the progress the student's making, how well the interventions are being implemented, and making sure we have a plan for what will happen if the student is making progress or not. And again, this will be our area of focus today. All right, this should be another familiar graphic to many of you. This is our overview of our Tier 2 behavior system and the basis for our Tier 2 chat series this year. While having a variety of evidence-based interventions to support students' behavioral needs is important, as I mentioned, it's also important to invest into that system. By having a strong system to support Tier 2, it's going to maximize our work efficiency and then, most importantly, the student outcomes. So today we'll unpack the features, the tools, and the processes within that strong system to provide ongoing progress monitoring to ensure that, we're meeting the needs of our students and maximizing the outcomes and making sure they're effective. So we're kind of down to that bottom layer there. We've been through everything else and we're making our way down to the bottom to where we're kind of looking at how well our interventions are being implemented and how effective they are. Okay, here's the tiered fidelity inventory. You're probably familiar with this too. Many of your school teams complete this each year as part of the end-year outcome data summary. So it's useful in checking the fidelity of our Tier 2 systems. So not necessarily the interventions themselves, but the big picture of the Tier 2 system. So as we discuss the evaluation and progress monitoring aspect of Tier 2, keep in mind these 4 features that you see here on the screen within the TFI subscale of evaluation. So we want to look at the team's level of use, the student performance data, the fidelity data, and that annual evaluation. And these are broken down further in the possible data sources and the scoring criteria. So we want to consider how your teams are tracking the progress of not only your students, but how well those interventions are doing. And that's what this TFI will do. Are they meeting the needs of your students? Are they being implemented with fidelity? Do you have a plan for when the students are or are not making progress, or when an intervention isn't successful for a group of students? So all of these are questions to consider as we're putting together that Tier 2 system to support your students. All right, so we've got a neat checklist here. It's called the Advanced Tiers Meeting Template and Checklist, and this is a real nice tool to help your school teams really look at the systemic aspect of your supports at Tier 2 or 3. So this first page here, you have a few checkpoints here of some of the things that will be helpful in making sure that you've got that infrastructure built for your Tier 2 team. So making sure that people on your team have that knowledge and expertise, making sure that we've got administrative support, you've got your evidence-based interventions, you've got like check-in, check-out or small group curriculum, and we've got a continuum of supports to move into Tier 3 if necessary. So this is like the first page of this meeting checklist, and this is something to look at every year, maybe every semester, to just really make sure you've got all those pieces in there to support that system for advanced tiers. Now on the next page, we've got, this is like the monthly meeting agenda and then notes for that. And one cool feature to point out there is, and this is really going to help you guys establish your systems too, is looking at really keeping track of the number of students that are receiving the particular interventions that you have. within your school. Maybe it's check in, check out, maybe it's a social skills group, things like that. So we want to know how many students are in that particular intervention at any one given time. We also want to know, like if you look at 2B, the number of students meeting their daily or weekly goals. So we want to know how's progress going. So we want to make sure that, we've got a good, healthy number of students making progress to toward their goals. And then also, like, we want to consider the fidelity as well. Then on the third page, we've got an area where you can list out the students, looking at their decision rules, and you can check off what you might want to do to help support that student. Maybe it's backing off the intensity of intervention. Maybe it's increasing it, or maybe it's changing the intervention altogether. So real good checklist here, and a good resource for you guys to kind of look at the big picture of the system itself.
I would just want to add one thing,
Sure, bro.
going back to that checklist or the team meeting agenda. As we're working through the chat today, as well as the chat series that Jason summarized to get us started, the idea is, as that tier 2 systems level coaching team, are we ensuring that we have resources readily available so that we can quickly and efficiently do the work of that tier 2 systems team? So again, this meeting checklist and template, as Jason described and broke it down for you, allows you to answer some of the questions that you're evaluating your systems team that align with that tiered fidelity inventory. So this is really just a resource and tool that really helps you organize some of those elements that you see on the TFI, and some of those elements that were described in that infographic of your tier 2 systems, your screening and decision rules, your alignment of your tier 2 interventions. And as Jason mentioned on that last page of the checklist, now that you've grouped your students, you're intervening, you're monitoring the progress, the decision rules, and next steps from there, which is what Jason's going to walk you all through a little bit more of, how the team efficiently progress monitors your tier 2 interventions.
Okay, so there are three key components of progress monitoring and evaluation that we should consider for both individual students and the interventions themselves. Let's first think about how this may apply to students on your team, the students your team is providing supports for. Okay, so the first component involves like collecting that outcome data. Like with a student-focused tier 2 intervention, our data collection may involve using like a behavior rating scale throughout the day. Collecting outcome data will allow a team to like see the trends of the students' behavior over time. Are they making positive progress? Are they making kind of questionable progress? Or are they not on track to meet their goals? So that's an important feature. So school teams also want to ensure that these interventions are being provided as intended and as often as they want them to be. That's another important feature. And this type of progress monitoring data can provide teams with valuable information on next steps like plan revisions, additional support for the implementers, or even reducing the level of support needed for the student. So by reviewing the outcome and fidelity data, school teams will be able to apply their predetermined decision rules and kind of map out their next steps for that student. So now let's consider how these three components apply to the tier 2 system as a whole. So as students are provided with a variety of interventions, it's important to know that like which interventions are most effective for students in your school and which ones are not. So as we saw in the advanced tiers meeting checklist, schools should know how many students are in each intervention at any given time and how many students are making progress toward their goals. So with like limited time and staff availability, it's important to review which ones are effective and which ones are not. So like by having this information on hand, teams can use the information to guide in their next steps. So let's consider that a tier 2 intervention has been running for one semester, but only 25% of the students are making progress in that intervention. This might be an opportunity to explore the reasons why and perhaps employ those or deploy those decision rules that you might have in place. So, we'd start asking questions like, might this intervention was it like provided as it should have been? Was it provided as often as it needed to be? Could the interventionist need more coaching on what that intervention would look like? Or maybe, the student may need an additional level of support. It could be a whole list of reasons, but like without having that systemic information, teams may continue to implement interventions that don't provide the results we're looking for. So, that's the importance of having, looking at both individual student data as well as that group decision-making data too. All right, so let's get into a couple of questions here in the chat. So what tools do you guys use for your progress monitoring? We're going to get into some progress monitoring features and some examples of that next, but I'm just wondering, what tools do you guys use now? And are they district or are they school-based? So just curious what you guys have and what you're currently using.
If anybody wants to be brave and go ahead and chat in the chat box, what are your school teams using in order to collect data for Tier 2 progress monitoring? We've got daily progress reports coming from Miss Carrie. We got some district-based forms. We've got a focus document to document interventions that has a graphing feature, which is awesome. Allows us to track both individual and peer comparison data. Give it just another second or two and see what else people are using. We've got the RTI database, and for Tier 2, mostly using point sheets to track progress on individual goals. Thank you, Francine, for sharing.
Very good. Sounds like we've got some pretty good individual student progress monitoring tools. I'd be interested in hear more about focus and the graphing feature and all that, how the technology is starting to improve for us and help us work more efficiently. So that's neat. So good. Thank you for sharing that with us. All right, so now it's time to discuss how teams may monitor progress and collect data for Tier 2. To make this an easy, efficient process so student teams can quickly and easily collect data by using readily available tools such as behavior rating scales, point sheets, or checklists. And that's stuff that we heard you guys are using. So that's great news. While these tools are readily available and easily administered, they should be able to assess specific skills for students and be sensitive to small changes. So we want to make sure that we're collecting data frequently enough so we can see what's going on almost on a day-to-day basis or a week-to-week basis. We don't want to spread out our data collection too far out because we may be missing some of the little things that could be happening from day to day. So, and we, with them being sensitive to the small changes, we want to be able to pinpoint the areas of need for the students. So, and then also by having a common process for collecting Tier 2 data, we want to be able to have those teams be able to compare progress across students and the intervention. So having that common data collection tool is very, very important at Tier 2. Just for ease of use and efficiency and, being able to see what's happening across students. And I see Carrie in the chat. We use the Florida Excel Tier 2 student progress monitoring tool. That's a great one.
We're going to be highlighting that in just a minute. So
Yes, we
stay
are.
tuned, everybody.
Yeah. All right. So as you're selecting your progress monitoring tool, there's some questions to ask. And this is an important step for the team. So consider these following questions to help in the selection of the right tool for your intervention. Um, Look at is the behavior internalizing or externalizing? This may inform what skills or behaviors you want to be tracking too. So, as I mentioned before, those students with internalizing behaviors, their behaviors may present very differently than those students who are, very obvious in some of their behaviors that they engage in. If a curriculum is used, if you guys are using a curriculum, the publisher may have one for you that's built into that. So that might be a progress monitoring tool that you could use with that particular curricular intervention. And then lastly, consider how easy is it to collect data with your forms? Is this something that's going to be very labor intensive? You may want to rethink that. We want this process at tier 2 to be very efficient but effectively, we want to be able to graph it easily. We want to be able to pick up on those small changes and, also consider how often data will be reviewed. And then one last big idea, when selecting a progress monitoring tool, it's recommended that students who receive the same intervention should receive the same progress monitoring tool. And this is so we're kind of comparing apples to apples. So just as you've got your interventions laid out for your particular school, make sure we're using that common data collection tool for the intervention you're using. Okay, so this is a simple rating scale shown. This is a daily progress report that might be very common to see with check-in, check-out. It can be applied for other interventions as well to measure progress towards school-wide expectations. So teachers can provide quick feedback about student behavior. Many of you guys probably use this or have at least seen this before. This can be done once a day or even throughout the day, as you can see. And depending on the needs of the student and the requirements of the intervention. So using a behavior report card such as this, it'll actually meet all the tier 2 criteria for progress monitoring. And it can be tailored to meet the core curriculum for your school to be effective. So we can add those school-wide expectations in there, like being an active learner, being respectful, and so on. So it can be very easily aligned with your school-wide expectations. And we've got another example here too, which shows you how they can be adapted to meet a little bit more individualized needs. So as you see with this one on the right, you've got some specific behaviors that would be aligned with the school-wide expectations of being safe, respectful, and responsible. If student needs that particular level, or if you have students with internalizing needs, we can help describe and reinforce and teach some of those more specific behaviors related to their own individualized needs. All right, so in this example from Royal Palm School, we see many characteristics that are aligned with our tier 2 systems and as well as the tier Fidelity inventory. As you can see, we've got a rating scale that's defined. So we've got a defined rating scale. We've got goals for the day. We can see how the day is divided into segments and how the implementer rated each portion of the day. So very flexible with this particular example here. It's also nice to see that there's family communication built into the daily progress report. And in the other example on the right, the student's day was divided up into classes or activities throughout the day to provide more frequent feedback. Could be discussed what could be earned and the percentages of points for that expectation. So both of these both of these forms show the adaptability of like a daily progress report. So you can look at your data through, you know, maybe just a few points in the day, or you can break it up, like with the example on the right, just through each activity in the day. And both of these would lend themselves to graphing your data really well to really track that progress. And these will also be sensitive to those small changes that we mentioned too. So a couple of good examples here of some daily progress monitoring tools with behavior rating scales built into them. And so here's how a school used the data collected on that daily progress report and put it into a graph. As you can see, the student has a goal for task engagement and met it in January. However, the team decided to monitor and implement the intervention to maintain that progress. I'm not sure why, but maybe they had some decision rules on why they wanted to keep that intervention. So this team could have had opportunities too to start backing down the intervention, maybe not abandoning it altogether, but looking at different goals or raising the criteria for success, perhaps. But anyway, they had this nice data set, and they had their goal, and then they had that current progress so they had a decision rule somewhere, and they decided to keep the intervention going, which is, I suppose, a good thing. As we can see, the student made some very good success here. Very good outcome. All right, so Carrie, here's your Tier 2 student progress monitoring Excel tool. This is a great tool that we have that we share out with a lot of our school districts. It's on our webpage and our live binders. So in this section of this progress monitoring tool, you can enter student information in, you can enter the primary concerns, you can enter secondary needs, grade levels, all of that stuff. Really get into the specifics about each student and their interventions. So in the next part of this, once you've entered all of that, it'll start to divide up like some potential motivations and types of supports necessary. And then and then this next section, this tan orangey section here on the lower right-hand side, this is where you would enter each student's daily points earned. And as a result of doing this tool will provide you with a nice looking graph, and you can move the trend line and all of that stuff. So this will wind up graphing out all of your data, and this tool can help you guys keep organized with, you know, who's getting the support, how their progress is going with the intervention. So real nice tool, very useful tool for that's kind of at your disposal. So those are some examples of the progress monitoring tools that are used at Tier 2. And moving in here, so we're going to get into looking at Fidelity tools within our Tier 2 system. So what tools do you guys use for Tier 2 Fidelity monitoring, and are they district or school-based tools? Feel free to add this into the chat box, please. Let us know what Tier 2 Fidelity tools you guys are using.
And as you all are responding, just like we posed basically the same question when it came to monitoring student outcomes with your Tier 2 interventions. Because we know that some districts will provide very clear guidance on this is how we want to be monitoring that progress. And so as Jason went through all of the features of effective Tier 2 progress monitoring, that's kind of just a question we want to be looking at. Is the district supported tools and guidance meeting some of those features that we know lend itself to effective progress monitoring, such as sensitive to small change, the frequency, etc. Or if you are in a district where you have flexibility as that school level team to select your progress monitoring tools, the goal here is that we're utilizing some of the resources we're providing to you all or the guidance to help select effective progress monitoring. And now as we shift that focus from student outcome, now we're focusing in on that tier 2 Fidelity monitoring. So I see the chat moving. So let's see, we've got Fidelity checklist that the district has shared with schools to utilize. So again, same thing as we talk through this, what are some core features of effective Fidelity, and are the tools that we're currently using meeting that? We've got additional district created. Oop, my chat moved on me. Or intervention specific Fidelity checklist. And then schools have the option to create their own. And then we've also been using some point sheets that get signed by the mentor, who adds some comments before submitting. So kind of embedding a little bit of some sort of Fidelity or check-in around the process, as they're also giving out student points, it sounds like. And lots of there's lots of district created ones coming through.
Yeah, that's what I was going to mention too. So the district's providing a lot of support around those Fidelity tools. So that's a good thing. Each school is going to be different, so you may have some different interventions in there too. So think about, I think it was, let's see, who was it? Yeah, Rebecca from Santa Rosa, she mentioned that schools have the flexibility too to create their own. And that speaks to my point of, there may need to be there may be a situation when, school might need to create their own to adapt it to an intervention that they're providing. So anyway, good stuff there. So we'll go through and show you some examples of Fidelity tools, and we'll describe Fidelity a little bit in a little bit more detail as well. So once we've got that student behavior data collected, it's going to be important to, we've got to look at periodic Fidelity checks. This doesn't need to be daily, but having those checks periodically is not a bad idea. We always say, when we're first starting an intervention, we may want to have those Fidelity checks more frequently. But as the wheels start moving and people start to get the hang of the intervention itself, we can maybe start to back off on those Fidelity checks. But it's going to be it's an important coaching tool to help pinpoint parts of the intervention that may need more coaching, or that may, need a pat on the back for doing really well. So be aware that there's two components of Fidelity though. Number one, we've got adherence. This asks the question, are the steps of the plan being implemented as intended? So are we doing all the steps in the plan? Are we doing all the steps in the intervention so it's done correctly? That's the big idea there. The other part of Fidelity is dosage. And it asks the question, is the plan being implemented as often as intended? So, if the particular intervention is, recommends once a day or once a week, we want to make sure that we're doing it to that level, that frequency. If we're pushing it off and not doing it to the frequency that we want it to, we're maybe not meeting the dosage, and will likely result in not making the progress we want. So dosage is also important. So next we've got some examples of these. So as you can see here, we've got an example of a check-in, check-out Fidelity checklist. We've got 4 simple steps here. Greeted and prompted students at the beginning of the class period, reinforced and prompted the student during class, rated the daily progress report at the end of the class, and then at the end of the day or the end of class, reviewed those ratings with the students. So this was a quick Fidelity monitoring check. It's just a yes or no, or maybe didn't apply for that day, and you can pull a Fidelity score in there. So this is an example of adherence to the steps of a check-in, check-out system. Yours may look different. You may have different types of steps, but this is just one quick example that we see. Here's another one that looks at dosage. So it looks like this particular intervention was a small group counsel, had a focus on small group, was a small group counseling focused on self-awareness. It went over the course of 6 weeks, and it looks like they did fidelity checks in week 1 and then did fidelity checks again in weeks 5 and 6. So, and it also looked at like what the topics were for each of those weeks too. So this is, we can tell by looking at this was a 6-week intervention, and it looked at the various steps on, was the lesson taught, yes or no. And they were looking at that, and there were some comments on the level of engagement the students had too. So this is another example of how dosage might be important, or how you could look at dosage in terms of fidelity. Okay, so here's a cool one that that we found that relates to a zones of regulation intervention. And, you know, I see in the chat too that Brooke put in there that evidence-based interventions will typically come with a fidelity checklist. And here's an example of that. This was zones of regulation. And this this pointed out like 4 different features of it, like preparation, structure, facilitation, and evaluation. These were the 4 features of the of fidelity. And then down below that, it provided a scoring rubric. So to answer yes or no for each of these, they could look at the scoring route or to score the intervention there within each part of the intervention. There was a scoring rubric. So I thought this was kind of a good example of a publisher produced fidelity tool, Fidelity Check 2. So look around for that. Look around for you know, if you guys are using a curriculum from a particular publisher, look around and see if they have a progress monitor or a fidelity measurement tool. Here's another one that describes check-in, check-out. This is adherence. So we've got the various steps there, where those steps completed. And as you can see here on the left, they had a much more much more in-depth. They had a more detailed, they had more detailed steps to the plan. And then over on the right, they had a more kind of a simpler look at things too. So it's, you know, looking at the adherence to if looking at fidelity and the adherence to the intervention, it doesn't have to be a long drawn out process. Adapt it to what meets the needs of your school. But the big idea is to make sure that it's just where you guys are meeting all the steps in the plan. So in the spirit of maximizing the outcomes for students, or even providing the interventionist some feedback on what they're doing, or perhaps some additional coaching if need be. So here's another example that looks at dosage. This was from Duval County. So pretty good example here. They looked at a couple of different interventions. So it looks like they looked at a group counseling, and then 2 students were in check-in, check-out, and they varied the amount of like each, whoops, sorry about that. So the amount of time in each intervention varied. So the group counseling was about 15 to 30 minutes once a week, whereas the other students in the check-in, check-out intervention had about 15 minutes per week. One student was daily, and the other one was only 3 times a week. So that was kind of a neat thing. They really mapped out how much of this intervention they get, how frequently they get it, how much time is involved in that too. So, and then they also put notes in here of, if you look over on the right, like what are the exit criteria for that particular intervention. So good stuff there. And this was another nice example of dosage for different types of interventions and how they can map that out.
Yeah, and I just want to make a connection to, I oftentimes we get really good at collecting that intervention data and progress monitoring and Fidelity for those individual students, and perhaps even bring it together in an individual student problem solving team. And this, we just wanted to highlight an example of how the school brought together their Fidelity data to look at it across students and across intervention group. So again, it's just a nice quick summary of where they're at with their intervention fidelity, so that that tier 2 systems team can help guide and make decisions across groups of students quickly and efficiently.
Okay, so as you guys are implementing your interventions, providing support, tier 2 supports to your students, how do you go about and how do you know which intervention is doing well and which one is not? How do you go about that process? What does that process look like for you guys? Feel free to drop that in the chat and let me know.
Don't see anything coming just yet. Oh, here we go. Thank you, Rebecca.
Everybody's typing at the same
No.
pace. Um, so, so
Want me to
Rebecca
read
says
it?
we've got a district created report and focus that pulls each student's average compared to the expected level.
Okay, we look at student behavior improvement. And I'm just going to give a little challenge of how do we know which intervention is working? How do we know which groups of interventions we want to keep and maintain for our campus? We got another response coming in, collecting data to see what's the function of the behavior, then matching that function with the intervention to meet the needs, progress monitoring, receive feedback, as well as observe, the interventions taking place to see student engagement, decrease in student behaviors, decrease in discipline data. All right. Thank you all for sharing.
Yes. All right, so let's look at some guiding questions here. So looking at the success of the group of students in a specific intervention is where we begin. So we want to know, how is that intervention doing? Are we seeing success with the particular intervention that we're providing to students? So oftentimes schools use a certain intervention simply because it's been done for a long time and it's just there, it's what we do. We need to consistently like evaluate the intervention as a whole, like look at it like, is this an effective intervention for our students at this time? So for each intervention, like review these questions and see how well they're doing. Like, so overall, are your students responding to tier 2 supports? That's the big picture question. And for each intervention, like how are students responding to check in, check out, or a social skills group that you're providing? How many of those students are successful? Is it 5 out of 10? Is it 8 out of 10? Have that information available, because I think it's going to help you guys go, hey, this intervention's really strong. We need to magnify this and make it even better. Or it's like, hey, this one's not doing very well. What do we need to do to get it working better, more efficiently? So having those decision rules there too. So that's the big picture, with like looking at making sure we're evaluating the interventions themselves, not just the students. So think a little bit deeper than the students, and think about the interventions the students are being placed in as well.
I'm just going to add a little bit there because I think this is an area where there's opportunity to continually make improvement and really refine that systems level piece. So as Jason had mentioned, if we're looking at our data and using something like the resource shown here, this is again a little one of the pages from that tier 2, tier 3 meeting agenda. And we see that the number of students in our social skills group, we only have about 20% of the students who are participating in our social skills group making progress. Is it that the intervention is not a good match? Is it that we just haven't given the intervention enough time? Or, is it just not a good intervention? Are we not doing it with fidelity? And so this is where having the tools and resources um, around the fidelity monitoring and around the student progress that allows you to look at it in terms of group data helps your tier 2 systems team make those decisions. So using this example of only about 1 out of every 4 students that is participating in our social skills intervention is making progress. If we then look at a tool, our fidelity data around the intervention dosage and adherence that we've described, and we have it summarized, maybe similar to the one example that we just showed from Duval, where we saw all the students and the interventions with how much of the intervention they've received, we might be able to quickly look at it and go, hey, only 25% is making progress, because right now only 25% has received the intervention with its full dosage. So how do we problem solve why this other group of students hasn't been able to receive that intervention in its dosage? And maybe it's a scheduling issue. Maybe there's other barriers to that intervention that is not related to the intervention itself, and it's not related to the student performance or skill deficit itself. So that's the idea, is when we're talking about evaluating the intervention and that intervention group, we're looking at both the student progress, like we've described, as well as that intervention fidelity, and put them together to help make those decisions. Sorry, go on.
No problem.
And here's some more tools to help you do that.
Yeah. So this is another one that another tool that we've provided for you guys. It's a tier 2 intervention tracking tool. Also another Excel tool, and this can track across months, and it looks at the number of students that are responding to each of the interventions. So as you can see here, like percent of students responding in that first graph, we'll get a bar graph here for your check-in, check-out, or perhaps your academic or social instruction. So all the different, you can insert all of your different interventions that you're providing at your school and simply just plug in some data there, and you'll wind up getting individualized graphs for each of those. So this is a really good tool to help you guys look at your systems data that Brooke was just speaking to. Is we want to know how well your interventions are doing, because if they're not very effective, we might want to get into some problem solving there. Does it need more training? Is it just not the right match for the students? Whatever it may be, a tool like this will give you that information, so you can decide to continue or not or discontinue the interventions you're providing. All right, so now that your team's collected outcome and fidelity data, like those decision rules, we've been kind of hinting at that about how beneficial they would be to determine your next steps. So like both with individual students within intervention and determining which interventions are having the greatest impact, like this fluid process, it's going to involve like the review of student data from the interventions we provide, as well as the fidelity of implementation provided within these interventions. So by evaluating the effectiveness of tier 2 interventions, teams will be able to use those pre-established decision rules to map out the next steps to support student behavior. So like they might include like reducing the level of support. So students might be making great progress within the interventions, and our data show that. So we might want to back down that level of support. They may want to continue a particular intervention. Maybe the student has not been in the intervention for very long, and they're starting to see a good trend in their behavior, but they wanted to give that particular intervention more time. Or maybe they just wanted to make a slight adjustment within that intervention. So And then we're gonna see some students who may need more individualized or intensive levels of support, perhaps at a tier 3 level, or perhaps an additional tier 2 intervention. So that's the importance of decision rules. It's like, okay, what do we do once we start to see progress or lack thereof? And what's that process we follow, and making that a standardized routine and a kind of a common thing. So it's not just kind of putting people together and going, all right, how's Jason doing? We don't know. We want to be able to have those predetermined decision rules to make that happen. And Brooke, did you have anything to add that you wanted to add there? Okay. I saw you pop back on screen. All right. So here's some examples of that. If we look in this yellow rectangle here that I've got these three bottom boxes that are highlighted, these are just some examples of decision rules that that may be useful. So like target behaviors will be added to students' behavior report cards if their goal was met less than 7 of 10 days. So they may want to be more specific about what they would want to add, or what they want to focus on for one particular student's behavior. Another goal here in the middle was when a student meets their goal of 8 or 10 days, the goal will be increased by 5%. So this particular student, or in this particular case, the team says, all right, when this kid's got a good successful trend, we're going to start increasing that the criteria for success by 5%. So another good solid rule there. And then this last one on the right, this goal here, or this decision rule would be interventions with less than 70% student success will be reviewed for fidelity and or revisit function. So they're looking at, okay, so this group of students is not being successful. Let's make sure we have good fidelity for our implementation. Let's make sure all those steps are there. Let's make sure that they're getting these interventions as much as we want them to, or they need to. And or if they are, then maybe it's hey, maybe we have the kid plugged into the wrong intervention. So that's something that's another decision rule there. This is not an exhaustive list, but these are some things to get you guys thinking about those decision rules for that group level, or for the intervention level at tier 2. All right, we've got some other examples to share with you guys on how Fort Caroline Middle School in Duval County, they've got a school intervention mapping tool. Some of the neat stuff on this one that I'd like to highlight is, they've got their intervention. They've got an entrance criteria, which is kind of this is like, what is a student, what needs to be going on with a student in order to get into this particular intervention. And they've got their criteria there: 1 suspension, 2 office discipline referrals, or low elevation on a screener. So they've got also a percentage of student enrollment receiving this intervention. So they want it to be less than 15%. They'll be using a daily progress report for check-in, check-out, and they want to have at least 70% of their students making 70% or more. So they've got that criteria set for how is this particular intervention going to be successful. So that's a real neat feature of this particular chart too. So wanted to share that with you guys, and how this particular school is they've got it mapped out for the different interventions. Here's another one for individual students in their decision in and decision out too. So this is just another way they looked at a couple of different interventions. They also looked at the small resiliency skill group as well. Okay, so the district, and we've heard this in the chat quite a bit about the districts providing you guys fidelity tools. And they're possibly providing supports around decision rules. So while these might be good examples of district guidance for decision rules, schools, you can see that these are pretty general. And so individual schools may also need to determine like what's positive, what's questionable, and what's a poor response to intervention. So may need to take these a little bit further to really meet the needs of their school and the dynamics of the student body there.
And I just wanted to add just the reason we're sharing some of these examples, like the one from Fort Caroline and how they mapped out the interventions that they were selecting, the tools that they're using for progress monitoring, some of their criteria that they've set for that Fidelity. If we're thinking about how we're coaching up our tier 2 system, the idea is that we're trying to organize all of our resources in a clear way so that we can quickly and efficiently make decisions, so that not every decision that we're making has to always be at that individual student level. We've already got decisions predetermined, made ahead of time. In this case, these examples that we're sharing, you have district that's giving some guidance to the school level team, and as Jason mentioned, there's still areas of what might have to be further defined in terms of positive, questionable, and poor. But really, as you work, if you're a district coordinator here who's supporting school teams at the tier 2 level, just thinking about what is the guidance that's being provided from the district around some of these practices, and what is an area that the school might need addition to build up some of those decision rules and vice versa. So really, just as we start thinking about this process in terms of progress monitoring and Fidelity, we want to organize our resources using the guidance and best practices of the features described here, with also thinking about the resources that we have available and making them user-friendly so that our school teams can make these decisions quickly. And I think that's it. Oh, we just have our recap. This was my slide anyway. So I'll just keep chatting. So hopefully you've joined us for each of the TA chats within this coaching series. Our goal with this coaching series was really thinking through this as that tier 2 systems team and what the role of the team was around the organization and process around screening and decision making. Then again, what was the role of that team for aligning and matching your students to the interventions based on the resources that you have available? And then in today's chat, what was the role of that team in helping with selecting those progress monitoring tools and then using those tools to make decisions, hopefully to improve student outcomes, but also to help make those decisions quickly, efficiently. You've heard me say that a bunch, but that's the goal, is making sure that all of our resources help us to do the job of that tier 2 systems, which is that overall infographic that we've shared with each chat as that reminder of this is the role of that system, this is what that team is doing, and then knowing that your district guidance or MTSS guidance is going to also have an impact on what that looks like at that school level. So as with the other chats, this will be recorded and posted for future viewing. And if you didn't attend any of the other chats and you want to see the full coaching series, we encourage you to do that. We also will, within the next week or so, for our district coordinators, you will have these slides available to you as coaching resources to provide coaching support to your school teams.
Thanks for joining us, everybody.
Yes, thank you. Special thanks to Jason and Brooke for presenting today. This chat is recorded. We're going to be posting it in our TA chat live binder within the